Hello, well, Dr. Brazier here. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about cultural implications of theories in general, and specifically of the neo-Freudian approaches that we've been looking at recently. So each of these approaches was created by one or more people who represent an intersection of several cultural aspects. I'm talking about race and ethnicity and gender and socioeconomic status and sort of even the culture of the day as far as what was being put forth and what was not being put forth, what was maybe almost being suppressed at the time that these theories were created. And so therefore these approaches represent those theorists' assumptions about mental health. And so those assumptions were clearly impacted by culture, whether the theorists recognize that or not. It is still true. All of us see the world through a specific worldview that is impacted by our culture, our cultural intersectionality, really, and we cannot escape that, and we don't need to, but it is helpful to be aware of it so that we don't come to our work with assumptions. Rather, we come with a curious and open heart, recognizing the intrinsic value that each person brings, and not imposing our paradigm of what is healthy or not healthy upon them. So as we look at these cultural, the cultural impacts of all of these theoretical approaches, I want to ask a couple of questions. I want to ask them of you, and I want you to keep asking them of yourself each week. So how do you see culture impacting these approaches? Each week, we're going to look at a different single approach or set of approaches. How does culture impact that? Which parts, if any, of these approaches can be appropriately applied to clients with a variety of cultural backgrounds? And then on the flip side, which parts, if any, of these approaches should be avoided or used with caution for clients with specific cultural backgrounds and experiences? If you keep asking yourself these questions, then you will come at these theories with a critical lens, not only seeking to find the faults, also seeking to find the cultural strengths, but recognizing that inherent in every theorist are cultural expectations, and that that have may have impacted the theory and how it would play itself out with clients, and sort of bringing a fierce protectiveness over each client's unique value. So a few cultural strengths of these neo-Freudian approaches to, just sort of recognize. One is Erik Erikson. So Erik Erikson made significant contributions to how social and cultural factors affect people in many cultures over the whole lifespan, right? Remember, some of those Freudian approaches are really going to hyper-focus on those early years, especially that classical analytic, that classical psychoanalysis perspective is going to focus only really on early childhood stuff, be super deterministic about what the rest of one's life is going to look like based on one's early childhood experiences, but not Erikson. He conceptualized growth across the lifespan, and even later in his work, added a final sort of stage of development, integrity versus despair. And I think about this idea that we talked about what is mental health. One definition of mental health from interpersonal neurobiologist Dan Siegel is this idea of integration. And here's Erik Erikson, a long time before we ever could scan brains and know much about the brain as it is alive and functioning. And Erik Erikson is saying the last stage is integrity, bringing together. And I think that's very interesting. And then this approach promotes intensive psychotherapy for therapists. So all these approaches are going to look at the issue of countertransference. And all of these approaches are going to require that counselors undergo their own work to recognize and avoid and overcome countertransference. And countertransference can be included under that umbrella of countertransference. Remember, countertransference is what I, as the counselor, am projecting onto the client, whether the client is an individual, a couple, a family, a group, the prejudices and biases that I might unknowingly, unwittingly project onto them is part of this, is part of countertransference. And so I appreciate these approaches because they hold the counselor to a super high standard. It's not enough to know the stuff. You've got to be working on yourself. And these approaches really shine a spotlight on that, and I appreciate that. Some limitations of some of these neo-Freudian approaches. So first of all, these are often based on upper and middle class value systems. And as such, not only may that socioeconomic worldview be imposed on clients for whom that's not their socioeconomic background and present situation, but also even just like classical psychoanalysis especially can be cost prohibitive for many people. Remember, in classical psychoanalysis, you're doing psychoanalysis 3 to 5 times a week for years. That's incredibly cost prohibitive. Most people in our society cannot afford to pay that. Again, I already mentioned this, but these approaches can be deterministic, and they don't emphasize the current situation. They see the current situation through the lens of what's occurred in the past. Cultural expectations may lead clients to want more direction and structure from the professional. So this is a really important thing to recognize. These approaches tend to be more non-directive. That's not bad. That's not good. That just is. And there are strengths to non-directive approaches and there are limitations. But especially classical psychoanalysis, where everybody's just sort of free associating and there's just not a lot of focused work. Clients who hail from cultures that really value and honor structure and order and rational progression through a stage-wise process may find that too loosey-goosey. And it may really turn them off to counseling, and they may even walk away with an expectation that all counseling is sort of this loose, almost chaotic process, and it's not. More concerned with long-term personality reconstruction than with short-term problem solving. Again, this is not necessarily a strength, nor is it a weakness. It is. For some clients, that deeper work, that depth work where we're working to really restructure underlying personality traits to make them more healthy, more adaptive, more integrated, is exactly what they're coming for. In other words, they don't want a quick fix. They want deep restructuring. Other clients, though, are coming to us with a quick fix. We need to have, as counselors, competency in discussing levels of therapeutic treatment with clients. And we need to be doing that early on so that we and the clients are on the same page about what the client is hoping to gain out of counseling. That's that open-ended question that we lead with after we review the limitations of confidentiality and informed consent. We're trying to dive into, can I come to a shared understanding with you, the client, as to what you're hoping to get out of this? And part of that is, if the client is hoping to get out of this help with a particular issue that's plaguing them in the present, we need to honor that. And if rather they're saying, I think that this issue that brought me into counseling is related to a whole lifetime of this, and it's not just that I want help with this issue, like I want help moving forward with changing how I'm doing this thing or how I'm being in these kinds of situations, then we know they're wanting to work at more depth. Both are good. Both are helpful. Neither is better or worse. We just need to align ourselves with what the client is wanting to get out of counseling rather than imposing what I think the client should want to get out of counseling or what my theory says the client must get out of counseling. And then these approaches can fail to address social, cultural, and political factors that can oppress clients. The systemic oppression of certain clients who are coming from specific client groups in which that kind of oppression is active in their systems, their family system, their larger community system, the political system in the world. It minimizes, in other words, the role of the environment and hyperfocuses on the role of the individual. Now, these approaches are not the only ones that do that largely ignore context and focus only on the person. It's not the only one. And so some of these limitations apply to other theories that we're going to be looking at during this course, but I wanted to highlight it here so that you're aware of it early on in our discussion of these cultural implications, and you can come to your understanding of theory, each theory's strengths and limitations, using a culturally competent viewpoint. I want to thank you for your attention to this presentation and for your willingness to grow in understanding and applying theory. And I hope to see you in future videos. Thank you.